screen's different than what's playing?
We're up 400 and something like 460 or so town meetings that I've done, and the reason to have the town meetings is to hear from you folks. It's not for me to stand up and give a big speech or anything. Try and answer your questions, or most importantly for me, is to hear your ideas and your thoughts about what we should be doing. We adjourned for the August break on August 1st, and without completing two very, very important items as far as I'm concerned. Number one was having done nothing to address the high cost of gasoline, of energy in general, and about setting the future for towards American energy independence. Since that day, some of us have been on the floor of the House basically asking the Speaker to call us back into session so that we can have a vote on our bill or any kind of energy legislation. The one that I'm supporting, in essence, will do a lot of different things, but focuses on energy conservation as far as incentives for insulation, as far as incentives for people to purchase vehicles that are much more energy efficient, to put policies in place so that we have consistency as far as renewable energy. When we look at ethanol, obviously soy diesel, biomass, geothermal, wind, solar, all of the things that can help us create more energy right here in the United States. Also, we've got to find a way so that we can build refineries in this country, which we haven't done for the last 30 years. Nuclear energy is something that we should be really focusing on as far as, especially our electrical generation. France can do it, we can't for some reason. We also have to be able to recycle that energy, that waste, or the nuclear rods, basically, the fuel, so that we use, rather than 10% of that energy, we use 90% of that energy. And it also shortens the half-life of the nuclear materials that are left over. But just as importantly, we've got to understand that 10, 15, 20 years from now, we're going to have a lot of new types of vehicles and a lot of new innovations. We've got to go after the resources we have right here as far as drilling, whether you talk about the outer coastal shelf. Extremely important, we have tremendous natural gas supplies out there that are untapped. 97% of our gas supplies are off limits today. We cannot drill where the resources are. Also, going for American oil, whether it be in Alaska, whether it be on the outer coastal shelf, so that we can lessen our dependence on foreign oil, which is a major issue to all of us, I think, as we think about spending $700 billion a year and shipping that off to places like Saudi Arabia and Iran and Venezuela, people who probably don't always have our best interests in mind. And we're also financing a lot of activities that are being used against us today around the world. The frustration I have is that we just have never been allowed a vote. That's all we're asking for, is a vote on energy legislation so that we can, in fact, see where people are. But I think it'll pass overwhelmingly if, in fact, we were allowed that vote. Another issue that when we adjourned on August 1st, and you may have seen something about it, I had kind of a one-man protest going on for 2 weeks to leave town before we had emergency funding for the disaster of the floods here in Iowa and throughout the Midwest. I wrote a letter to the Speaker. I was on the floor for 2 weeks talking about it, trying to say that we cannot adjourn until that's addressed. It was not, and it's very frustrating because we're not going back until September 8th into session. If we would do it immediately, it would probably be well into November, December before any funds are available, even if it were signed into law immediately. The only thing I'm asking for is fairness when the fact that with Katrina, 2 days after that, we passed an emergency supplemental with $60 billion and signed into law the next day, and we can't get any help here right now. It's going to be used for leverage, basically, when we go back, for us to have to vote for that, because it'll be tacked on to some other legislation that we probably wouldn't support anyway. It's outrageous as far as I'm concerned, what has not happened. Some of the initiatives that I've been working on, certainly the nursing shortage in Iowa and throughout the country. We've got legislation that has huge support throughout the whole nursing groups. There are 44 different groups that are supporting the legislation. I have one that focuses on more faculty. Another one is much more broad-based as far as the reimbursement issues and a lot of different issues involved with that to Iowa healthcare professionals. And though we can talk about it, and I've talked enough already. I want to hear from you folks. So, yes.
I think Speaker Pelosi got the message that we want to vote on energy and drilling offshore. I see she had a 180-degree turn in her position shortly after she went home to visit with folks, rightly so. I just returned from a trip to Alaska, and the people in Alaska think that we can drill in those environmentally sensitive areas, are a bit concerned about it, would like to have us come up there and drill. And so I think even people who before, for various reasons, didn't want to do anything in their backyard, now realize if we're going to move this country in the right direction, that they're willing to support some of these things like new refineries and drilling in some of these areas of nuclear power. And I'm glad to see that change, and I appreciate the fact that you have pushed that forward.
It's a huge issue. When the refinery issue you talked about, we have not built a new one in 30 years in this country. We've expanded capacity of some of the existing ones. One problem is they're all right down in the hurricane alley down there, and so we get a big storm, and that really affects the whole nation's supply. We need to have them scattered out around the country, closer to where the sources of energy are, and that would help a great deal as far as a consistent source of energy. When you talk about, up in Alaska, up in Anwar, it's very frustrating when people talk about like you're some pristine area. I mean, it's on the coastal area out there. It's out in the middle of a swamp, in essence, that freezes over in the wintertime, which is the only time that they would be out on it, so there'd be no footprint. But the area they're talking about would be similar to, they always use the analogy of a post stamp in the middle of a football field. And we're already drilling just to the actually to the west of that area somewhat. And there's one other consideration that I wasn't aware of until just a few weeks ago, is the fact that the Alaskan pipeline now the capacity is down to about 600,000 barrels going through that. You'll assume that capacity, or the amount of oil available, is going to be reduced by at least half in 4 or 5 years, and it will not be economically feasible to keep the pipeline open if we don't have additional sources of oil up there. But I just, the idea of not giving the representatives in Congress a chance to vote on the issue is what really is frustrating. Yes?
I'm Kathy Burtness, and I'm the director of the Mason City Housing Authority.
Very
so
good.
I'm kind of here on behalf of the flood victims, right. And since that time we've kind of been overwhelmed with applicants for assistance, and of course we're limited to the funding that HUD provides for us. And at this point we have a 15-month waiting list for any applicants. And we've probably accepted 80 applications from flood victims, and I'm just wondering if your thought for fall is to do something similar like they did in Katrina. I know they brought out disaster vouchers for Katrina. We have a privately owned complex in Mason City that floods kind of repeatedly, and at this point it's not being restored. The bottom level is still uninhabitable. 32 elderly and disabled households were displaced from there, having to relocate with no subsidy. And so we're kind of just, wit's end, trying to find sources to help them, because it's almost looking as if the owner is not going to be able to rebuild because it's actually in a floodplain, and so it's kind of, they're in limbo right now.
Well, and it's the uncertainty that's out there that is just so frustrating to everybody, and until we actually have the funds, they know what's available, and the state obviously has to have a plan to submit, but, HUD released $85 million, which is a drop in the bucket as to what's going to be needed. I mean, the problem we have here, I don't know how many times you multiply it, say in Cedar Rapids or something like that, but that, which doesn't demean at all, every individual is in a crisis right now. And the fact that we don't have the funds available, they cannot commit to it until those funds are in the bank behind them. And why, I mean, I asked unanimous consent, or the chairman of the Appropriations Committee the night before we left, to, bring this up and, move it. And no, we couldn't do that. Would not go along with unanimous consent, because no one would vote against it. The problem is that for political reasons, they're going to tack it on to something else that make you vote for a lot more spending someplace else, or new taxes or something else. And it's never been used as a political tool like that before. I mean, with Katrina, like I said, 2 days later, we had $60 billion signed into law the next day. About another week down the road, we had another $25 billion that was passed and signed that very day down there. And there was, the original $2.65 billion that was the emergency disaster funding that was attached to the war supplemental. That over half of that goes to Katrina still. And so it was, of the $600 million that was for HUD in that, half of it was already committed down there, or was going to be committed. And they've only released $100 million of the $300 that's left. And we get 85% of that. Now they say that it'll be a lower percentage of the additional for Iowa. But I mean, it's just, there's probably at least 300 estimates of $300 million of just agricultural conservation repairs that need to be done. I mean, that's just one little part of it. Plus all the SBA stuff. And also, I mean, we're getting a little example right now. There's a small hurricane or storm down in Florida, but if you have another large hurricane down there, we're really going to get forgotten.
Yeah.
And that's,
Out of sight,
we're way too nice sometimes. Sure. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Latham,
Yes.
I really, really will appreciate anything you do for the flood victims in Mason City. I'd also like to talk to you about something else, and then I'd like to ask you a question.
Sure.
In 2001, I drove a trailer here in Mason City that had a census statement. And it said if you're in your 20s, by the time you grow up, the population in America will double. The television went crazy. They turned their cameras off. A lady ran along by the side of my car, tried to throw me out. Head of the Chamber of Commerce, by the way. And now, I went to a town hall meeting last night, and I'd like to give you some information.
Okay.
I talked to you one time about this subject, and you said that you had all these illegals waiting on the corners for jobs. And at that time, and still today, nobody's doing anything about it. I'd like to give you that information. I'd like to give you this information.
Okay.
This is by the American Legion.
Okay.
I'd like to give you this information.
Okay.
Population growth is a primary cause of environmental damage.
Okay. Thank you.
This is by Numbers USA. And by the way, they were involved, I had a town hall meeting here in 2001, and Lloyd Beck was here, the very same person that's still concerned about this problem. Here's the Minnesotans seeking immigration reform. And I'm going to keep this one.
Okay.
You can't have homeland security until you secure the homeland. Stop illegal immigration and secure the border. My problem is, we could have plenty of money for this flood damage if we weren't putting out all this money for these illegals. Austin, I was bad enough. Marshalltown is flooded, down by Cresco. The various organizations, the Ford Foundation, several foundations are pumping money into this, and if the employers didn't want to pay less wages, that's one of the major problems. And I'm very disappointed in the Democrats and the Republicans for not doing anything about it. I really respect McCain for his military service, but they're gonna give all these people,
Let's let the representative answer you.
Well,
just a minute, and I'm gonna ask him something. What would you do about it?
Well, we have, we've got to secure the border, you're exactly right, and we, trying to build a fence down there, and that we, the people in charge in the appropriations committee today, we appropriated $650 million last year. They put in a whole bunch of provisions. You got to remember, there's a group of people who want just totally open borders.
Yes.
Okay. They put in so many prohibitions and regulations into that funding that we were only able to spend about a fourth of about $175 million last year, because now you have to have sign off from all the locals. The states have to approve, the county has to approve, if there's a city involved or whatever, basically just trying to stop the progress of, which is extremely frustrating. Enforcement is everything as far as I'm concerned, whether it be, you look at what happened in Postville. And anyone, if the allegation, and if the allegations are true, the way those people were treated over there, I mean, in my mind, they should be put away forever.
Yes.
Because it's simply outrageous what they're doing on a human basis to those people over there. Having said that, until we secure the borders, we're gonna have this problem. And they had a direct pipeline from Guatemala to Postville. That's in small, very poor communities down there. That's where they brought them through, or brought them from. We're seeing the human toll from all that today, with the families split up and kids with their one parent gone, the other one has no money, can't even get back home. Some of them, until we intervened, basically didn't even know where their spouses were, or their dads were, or mothers in some cases. But we've got to, as a result of what's happened over the last 20 years of just no enforcement, and when you do enforce it, then the consequences are so horrible. I mean, the idea of Postville having helicopters swoop down and 100 law enforcement people surrounding the place, it has just, I've met several times with the people in Postville, been over there as city council. I mean, it's devastating to the community, but it's been building and building for a long time. And that's, we've got to enforce it. The whole idea of people coming into this country, their first act is to break the law. It's very hard to expect them to respect any other laws.
They also plan to build a major highway between Mexico and Canada, have this all one country, North American Union, and change our money system. And people better wake up and read about it and learn about it.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name's Don Sapp. I'm a retired businessman here in Mason City, and I'm concerned about the flood victim of Midwest and Iowa, energy and the whole thing, but I'm gonna go clear out in left field on my subject here. A lot of you sitting here probably don't even know anything about it. It's HR Bill 6598, that Prevention of Equine Cruelty Act of 2008. It should be as enhancement of equine cruelty. It should be changed. What we've done in the legislation session in '08 is closed 3 slaughter plants for horses in the United States. And I know most of you sitting there don't know anything about it and probably don't care. But I raise and sell a few horses after the last 25 years. There's around 100,000 head of horses slaughtered in the United States each year. Well,
Not anymore.
we shut them down, and 30,000 of them is going to Mexico and Canada. Now, with this HR 6588 Act, we're going to shut that 30,000 down. What we've done is brought them back in the United States, and they're not going to be taken care of. You've taken the floor clear out of the equine market. A 1,000-pound horse used to be 50 cents a pound. It might be a nickel now, if it's not broke. And what we're doing is turning them loose across the United States. We're not caring for them. They're starving to death because we can't afford to take care of them. If you legally euthanize it, which is quick and it's humane, about $150 to have the vet come and do it, $250 to get the horse picked up, $400. You got a $1,000 swing there. Or you have the neighbor dig a hole and bury it, and which is illegal or legal or wherever, which is not good. And I know this is coming up when you go back in session, and this thing needs to be turned around. You can't do it right away, but we need to get some plants opened back up in the United States. Get a competitive market. I know that there is mistreatment. There's mistreatment in the hogs and the cattle slaughter at times. We've tried to screw that down, but we could do it on the other side. The ones that's going to Mexico is real blatant cruelty. Canada, I can't really tell you about. But we need to change this around on this HR bill. Now, if you've got some comments, I'd be more
Well,
happy.
I mean, I oppose shutting down the plants, you know, time and time again for years, but it's something, it's not a rational argument, it's an emotional argument, and the most humane thing for these horses would be to have a place here where they would either be taken care of, or if they're sent to slaughter, that's, you know, and the meat's shipped to France or whatever. But like you said, so many of them now are, even because it's the cost that they have, either they're being turned out on the range to fend for themselves, and, or they're not fed, they're certainly not taken care of, and you have all of the horse vets. Everybody says this is just insane, this new policy they put in place. It's not, anyone who understands the industry or the horse people are opposed to this. But it's basically one guy from New York that's got everybody's emotions all New York City. I'm sure he has a lot of horses running around, I'm sure. But that has pushed it, and they've been successful. And it's crazy.
The Humane Society, and I think Pete is behind this, and there's several behind it, but it's something that needs to be turned around because it has done nobody really any good. I mean, I'm not one to go sit down to dinner tonight and eat old Nelly, but the foreign countries, they like it. You know, they like it, and that's part of the economic of the equine stuff. Thank you.
It's crazy.
Yes. I came late. Maybe you already talked about tax reform. I'd like to.
Go ahead. No, we have not.
I'd like to hear your ideas on how taxes will have to change so we don't just kill off our grandchildren with all kinds of debt.
Well, I think as far as the debt is concerned and equated to tax, the best thing we can do is to have a strong economy in this country. We generate more tax revenues when the economy is strong, people are paying to have jobs, paying taxes, companies are paying taxes. You know, if you're saying, do I support raising taxes? No.
Well, what kind of tax change do you advocate?
I mean, I would really.
Improving the economy is not going to be the whole answer, is it?
Well, raising tax rates, and the budget that was passed this year had in that the largest tax increase in the history of the universe, $653 billion tax increase in their budget, because what they're saying is that the family tax, child tax credit would go away, we'd return to the marriage tax penalty, we would revert back to much higher punitive capital gains tax rates. All of those things would be very detrimental to the economy. As far as, I mean, the engine that creates jobs are the business out there, and we already have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world, which is one of the reasons people talk about jobs moving overseas. When you combine that with the most stringent regulatory system in the world and the most lawsuits, we have more litigation, we're the capital litigation in the world. I mean, it's a small wonder that a lot of businesses see it much easier to go someplace else to set up their operations, basically. So I don't think we need to raise taxes to generate revenue for the federal government, because it has never done that. The portion that comes out of the economy basically stays the same at lower tax rates, but you have a lot more generation of economic activity. What would you like to see?
Well, it seems
I'm here to
like,
listen. You missed that part. I'm not supposed to be giving big speeches up here. I'm supposed to be.
I just am aware that there were some pretty drastic changes made in this administration as far as the top level producers, the richest people. They have quite a tax break.
The top 5% pay over half of the income taxes in the country. We took about 7-8 million people, lower income families, off the tax rolls entirely. The tax system today is, if you like progressive, it's much more progressive than it was before the tax relief that went in 2001 and 2003. And we were, basically, obviously we were having the economy after 9/11, after the dot-com bubble burst, all of those things, the revenues dropped dramatically, especially capital gains tax rates, because people were paying capital gains on, air basically at that time. Anybody that sold paid capital gains, and there was a big influx of revenue. But when that bubble burst, all the assets went out of that market, and that affected a great deal. And obviously with after 9/11, going into Iraq and Afghanistan, have huge drains on the budget. But the amount that's absorbed out of the private sector, it doesn't vary that much. It's about 19.5%. If you have lower tax rates, you just have more generation of activity. Higher tax rates slow down, make the pie smaller, but the percentage stays about the same. Thank you.
The other side of that is the spending,
Yeah.
the outrageous spending, that just keeps happening in Congress.
Well, and
How do we
that's,
go about making some changes there?
let's talk about the whole federal budget once, okay? 2/3 of the budget is entitlement spending and interest on the national debt. Okay, which we, in essence, have no control of, because it's not voted on an annual, it's not discretionary funding that's voted on an annual basis. So you've got Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Farm Bill, Highway Trust Fund, funding for the states, all of those things that basically is on automatic pilot. you've got 1/3 of the budget left for discretionary spending. Over half of that is either for defense or homeland security. Now, and those have increased. The slides, the 1/6 of the budget that's left over that has your education benefits and all the things that people, like, has basically remained pretty much flat. The huge issue is to address the entitlement spending, because that's growing at 7 or 8% a year. It's 2/3 of the budget, and that's why Social Security, and even, is gonna be, in essence, bankrupt. There's no money in there anyway. The trust fund for Medicare there's no money there, but that's gonna be totally, the IOUs are gonna be depleted in less than about 8-9 years. But until you see any kind of reform in those things, it's gonna just keep expanding, and especially in the next 10 years, all those baby boomers get into it. I mean, you've seen nothing yet.
Can you talk about the reforms?
Yes, reforms, I think that we're really looking at it. How do
Right.
we make those changes?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've signed on to, divided we fail, idea that we've got to find on a bipartisan basis, because those Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid are the, quote, third rail of politics. No one's gonna step up unless everybody goes over the cliff together. And just basically the ARP and NFIB, the small business people, the Business Roundtable, the Service Employees International Union is quite an interesting group together, to say that we've got to, everybody pull together. Whether that means you have an outside commission that, by law is established that when they make recommendations, Congress has to then vote up or down on what their recommendations are. Because politically, I don't know how you get it done. People will not vote to, when the next election, they're gonna be accused of throwing grandma on the street. It just isn't gonna happen. But it's gotta be done on a bipartisan basis, and unfortunately, the way Congress is today, it's totally broken, and you're not gonna get anything done. And it's not even a serious debate in the presidential campaign or Congress as far as long-term entitlement change. And that's very unfortunate. That's why, I respect that effort, because they're trying to make it an issue. What would you like to see? Please, yeah, I know. Well, and it's, what, I'm fine, but my, 4-year-old grandsons are gonna get ripped. It's not me, you're fine, probably virtually everybody in this room is fine.
If you review the eligibilities for some of those programs and tightened up.
On the
some-
entitlement side?
Sure. And I know people need entitlements, I don't dismiss that at all, but there has to be some way that we can review many of those entitlements.
Medicare actually is the most critical issue and probably the hardest to deal with, because I think Social Security, and like they did in 1982, basically they passed a bill then that made reforms for the future so that people could get through a couple of elections before it actually hit anybody.
Yeah.
But Medicare, the crisis is now. And I just, anytime, we have a low reimbursement here in Iowa the way it is, and to take more money out of Medicare is probably not good for our healthcare delivery system here. What a lot of us would like to see is simply trying to rein in the rate of growth a couple of points. Rather than 8% annual growth, maybe do 5.5%, 6% growth, which actuarially over time makes a huge difference. But that is, you do that, and then you're accused again of throwing grandma out in the street.
Growth of what? What are you talking about? Growth of?
The rate of growth of spending in those programs. You have a lot more people coming into the system, and you also have increase as far as the cost of the system. And the combined, it's just not sustainable.
Used to have a thing called a means test, which was a way of looking at your tax returns to see if you're really eligible. Is that what you're thinking
Well,
of?
that would be one of them, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, you,
For
there's a
example-
lot of, go ahead.
For example, in my area, the disability area, we would like to see institutions closed down to a very small area, bring people with disabilities into the community where they have some choice of their possibly getting jobs, possibly doing other things in the community, more productive person in the community. People in the communities are paid less than people in institutions as far as the workers. So there'd be one, let's transfer that money from the institution, follow that person with disability, so that their family can make better choices for their needs.
Okay.
That'd be one review, certainly.
Yeah. I mean, it all costs money.
Sure. But having that money follow the consumer, we think would cost less